Good morning once again, and if you are visiting with us, you picked a great Sunday because we start a brand new message series entitled Basic Training. And so if you're a Christian, a follower of Jesus in this room, isn't it true that in our lifetime, we kind of learn over the years, whether it be in church, whether it be in private school, whether it be through our parents or our grandparents, we kind of learn and categorize what's most important in the faith. You know, whether that's through reading scripture or listening to someone, we kind of get the idea of this is important and this is important and this is important. And if I can just have these main categories filled, then I think I'll be heading in the right direction. But as is the case in most followers of Jesus' lives, isn't it true that over a period of time when seasons change, rhythms change, jobs change, locations change, all of a sudden some of those pieces begin to fall to the wayside. And then we wake up and we say to ourselves, why? I remember we used to do this. I remember we used to do this. I remember this was a lot better. And then we say, why is it that these are not happening the way that they should? And we realize some of those main components of Christianity are not in place. So for the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about some of those main principles that wherever you're at today, and I'm excited because we're going to introduce one of them, and we'll be challenged today in this room to be able to say, do I have that principle in place? Is that principle a part of my life? And what's going to happen, before we even introduce it, here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is if you don't have that principle in place, the enemy is really going to do this. He's going to say, well, there's a reason why you can't. Well, that's impossible. Well, that's not that important. And so all the excuse machine is going to get ratcheted up, and we're going to walk out of here, and many of us are going to say, well, that's not for me. So even before you know whether you're in that category or not, I'm going to warn you, be careful. Because what we're going to introduce are some of the principles that Jesus himself, and we're going to learn that today, says it's a priority. Now, to set this up, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had the privilege of being a substitute chaplain for the Miami Marlins. Yes, they're still a professional baseball team, I promise. And I remember on Sunday afternoons, right before their game time, I would leave church early, and I would head to, back then it was Pro Player Stadium, and I was charged with a friend to be able to lead a devotional for some of the Major League Baseball players. And so as a baseball lover and friend, it was such a really cool moment in my life to have the privilege to do that. And I'll never forget one time the Miami Marlins or Florida Marlins back then were playing the New York Mets. And a guy by the name of John Olerud was playing for the New York Mets at that time. And John Olerud is a follower of Jesus, Christian, I knew that. And so my job that week was to not do the devotion for the Marlins, but to do the devotions for the New York Mets. So we went into the Marlins side, and they had a really nice clubhouse, and we sat there, and we got my buddy led the devotion, and we kind of just sat there and just chatted with them. And then we went over and we pivoted and we went to the visitors clubhouse. Now, if you've ever been a part of a professional sports arena, especially back in those days, the home clubhouse looks amazing, incredible. You go to the visitors clubhouse, and it's just not fun. It's just not pretty at all. So I walk into the visitors clubhouse, and it's like cement walls. It's sterile. There's not much there. And all the Major League Baseball players are there. They're getting ready, getting their uniforms on. And so I walk in, and I'm trying not to be starstruck because this is really important to me. And I'm walking around, and someone had told me that John Olerud would be my contact, that he would be the one. He's going to make sure that he's a part of that, and he's the ringleader. So I walk in, and I look for the guy with the helmet. That's an inside joke for all of you who know baseball. And so I see all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, instead of a guy wearing a hat, I see a helmet, and I look, and it's John Olerud. So I walk up to him, I introduce myself, and he says, great. He says, awesome, thank you so much for coming and doing this. He said, I'll go ahead and I'll start getting the guys ready. He said, we're going to meet in there. And he pointed into the shower area. So I walk into the shower area, and some of the guys were not finished. So I walk into the area, excuse me, pardon me, and they walk out. And there's no chairs, there's nothing in it, it's just an empty shower room. It's like this area. And so I'm like, are we in the right place? And so all of a sudden, John Olerud and maybe a handful of other players come with him, and they join me. And while they're coming in, I hear John going from locker to locker, and some of the guys who are not Christians and don't see the importance in it, they start, oh, you're going to do your Christian thing again, John. And they would like poke fun and make fun. But I remember, never forget, John Olerud saying to them, hey, the invitation is always open for you. No matter how much you give it to me, the invitation is always open for you. And so John walked in, and there were a handful of people, and and all of a sudden I noticed they were carrying buckets, and they had a couple extra buckets. And so here I am with a few New York Mets in a really wet and disgusting shower, sitting on buckets, and basically doing a Sunday morning devotional before their games. At the end of the devotional, I remember, and I said, Mr. Olerud, and he said, call me John. I said, John, I just want to thank you for, having the courage and the rhythm to do this on Sunday. He goes, no. He goes, don't thank me. He said, thank you for taking your time to come out here. And then, true story, and I don't say this, I just say this to show the character of John Olerud. He reached into his pocket and he pulled out a $100 bill and he handed it to me. And I said, no, I can't take it. And he said, no. He says, you have to. He said, that's a must. And he tipped me $100 for coming and doing that. And I'll never forget that because I met the measure of a man, and it was pretty incredible. Now, that leads us to our topic today, and you'll be like, well, that was it? Like, you'll see why. What I loved about John Olerud is that what was said about him is that he was a strong believer, and every Sunday before a baseball game, no matter what, he made the time to be able to make sure he had his priorities in place. Well, this morning, we're going to take a look at a story, and we're going to look at it in a different angle. So if you're not a Christian or if you're new to Christianity, you might not have seen this story before, and so I'm going to tell you the basics of the story and get it out of the way for you, okay? So Jesus is there. He's doing his ministry. He's teaching a lot. Crowds are gathering. There's a group of religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. They don't like Jesus very much because they're a threat to their status. And so all of a sudden, there's a Pharisee, a lead Pharisee, and he's like, you know what? We got to get rid of this guy. And so he decides, why don't we do this? Why don't we invite him over to our house, and I'll host a dinner, and we'll invite him over to our house, and then maybe we can trap him. So what their plan was is that they invited him on the Sabbath. And now on the Sabbath, God says, according to his word and law, that you are not to work. You're not to do anything. You're supposed to rest. And so they invite Jesus, they invite a bunch of other religious leaders, and they invite one other person. This one other person is a prop. Now, the one other person is a creation of God, and God loves him. But to the Pharisees, he was a prop. All he was a method to get to their madness. So they invite this guy to the dinner to trap Jesus. And that's what was happening. And instead, what Jesus does is he's at the dinner, he's going to flip it around on them, and he's going to turn the tables on these individuals. And the moral of this dinner is basically this, that while the law is the law, the heart behind the law matters more. That's the essence of this story. However, as we talk about the topic today, if that's all we see, we miss so many side lessons that Jesus wants to teach us through his example. And that's where I want us to really focus on, because I don't think Christians focus on that part of this story. So now that we have the main part out of the way, we're going to begin reading the story, and we're going to dial into a different part of it. So let's read Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. Take a look at me. It says, one Sabbath day, Jesus went to eat dinner in the home of a leader of the Pharisees, and the people were watching him closely. And so right off the bat, just like I said, you had a lot of people who were watching. Why were people watching him closely? Well, you had two different sets, okay? If you're new to this story, you had obviously the religious leaders, and they were watching because they wanted to trap him. But then you had all the followers of Jesus. You had all these crowds that were following him and his disciples that were following him. And all of a sudden, Jesus receives an invitation from a Pharisee. Now, if I was a disciple and I'm looking at Jesus, I'd be like, yeah, throw that in the trash. That guy's after you. That guy don't want any part of you. That guy's a jerk. Don't dare accept an invitation. What? He's going? Jesus, you're going to dinner? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why do you even care? I just don't understand you. But Jesus accepts the invitation to this dinner. And it's almost as if Jesus has a message within that. Because really think about it. Like, why did Jesus accept that invitation? I mean, let me ask you a question. Is Jesus God? Thank you. Some of you are like, some are like hanging off at the side. It's like, I don't know, trick question. I don't know about this. And then some of you are like, no, I'm going to just be bold. Yes. Okay, good job. Yes. Jesus is God, okay? So does Jesus know yesterday, today, and tomorrow? So did Jesus already know the hearts of the Pharisees? Did he know that he was being set up? And did he still go? Isn't that powerful? Isn't that powerful? So if you're a note taker, here's one of the points that I want to bring out in this. Number one, Jesus modeled community so that everyone had an opportunity to be seen. Do you want to know why I think Jesus went to this? It's because Jesus knew he was going to have an opportunity. He was going to have an opportunity to be able to look at Pharisees. Yes, those Pharisees. Yes, those that were doing wrong things. But he also knew that there would be a guest that would be a prop there, and he knew that he'd have an opportunity to be able to see that person. In other words, Jesus knew that there was a lot wrong with this dinner, but he also knew that community matters. He also knew that if I have an opportunity to sit before a group of individuals, that there might just be a purpose for me in this, and that I might have an opportunity to be able to honor my Father by going to this. Yes, I don't like the people. Yes, I don't have a lot in common with the people. Yes, I don't even want to be in their house. Yes, it's going to cause me a ruckus with all my followers, and it's going to cause confusion. But I want to show the people of Ocean View and in the 21st century that community matters. Because you might not, as an individual, you might not want to, it's going to pop up right here, I promise. You might not want to be seen for who you really are, but everyone needs to be seen by someone. That person that the Pharisees dragged into dinner, I promise you he didn't want to be there. But you know what? Jesus knew that he needed to be seen. And Jesus knew that he had something special to be able to see. So we continue the story, and I'll explain this a little bit more as we go along. Luke chapter 14, verse 2, it says this. There was a man there whose arms and legs were swollen. And then Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in religious law, is it permitted in the law to heal people on the Sabbath day or not? So now, let me let you know about this individual. This individual had a disease known as dropsy. Dropsy was known in biblical times, and basically what is dropsy? Dropsy was a condition that could have been cancer. It could have been inflammation of the liver. It was a kind of an illness that affected the entire body, whether it's cancer or whether it's some kind of inflammatory issue where the cells and the bodily functions would swell to the point where it would be near death. In other words, this was an individual that the hope for this individual was not good at all. Now you begin to see that the Pharisees invite this man to this dinner. Now, side note, if you're not a Christian, come over here with me. You have to understand something here. There are people like this all over the place. And they usually would hang out by the temple area. And the reason why they would hang out in the temple area is because God's people would come there to worship. And the hope is that they hung out there, that people would have mercy on them. People would bless them. People would give them time. People would actually look them in the eyes and see them. But the religious leaders didn't like these people hanging around. And if they were not clean, they would say, unclean, 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 and they would send them away. And so notice the Pharisees all of a sudden want to invite a man with dropsy to come to dinner? Are you crazy? But they did it on purpose. So what does Jesus do? Jesus looks and understands what's happening. You see, I got to believe this. Jesus comes to dinner, and let's say Jesus didn't know what was happening. If it was me, I'd be coming in, and I would look, and I would walk into the Pharisee's house. And what happens when you walk into someone's home where maybe you're going there for dinner? What's the first thing that you do? You compliment, right? You say, oh, you have a beautiful home. You address the host, right? You say, oh, very nice. You have a lovely home. Thank you so much for inviting me to come to dinner. Oh, something smells really good. I look forward to eating. Oh, who else is here? There'd be a lot of conversations with the host about the home. That would be where my attention is. But do you know what? Where did Jesus' attention go to? He immediately noticed the man in the room. He immediately noticed a man with a need. In other words, he immediately noticed and elevated what the purpose was for that dinner. You see, to Jesus, the purpose for that dinner is for his Father's heart to come out of him and to affect the people around the table. For his Father's power to come out in that room and to possibly affect and change a life forever. In other words, Jesus didn't notice the Pharisee leader's designer jeans or great hat. He went right past all of that, and he went right to what matters most. The lesson that I learned from this as an individual when it comes to community is this. Number 2, Jesus didn't find time for community. He made time for it. He was invited, and no matter what happens, he saw the opportunity and the importance of it, and he said, I'm going. No matter how many people said not to, he went to it. And when I say community, I'm not talking to the dinner. Because how many of you have ever been to a dinner and you really never said anything significant? You ever been a part of one of those? Where maybe your hope is something happens at a dinner, that you get around a table with a group of people, and the hope is this topic comes up, this conversation comes up, or an opportunity comes up, and you have a wonderful dinner, and everybody scats around the topic, and no one gets anywhere, and you leave the dinner, your belly is full, but the conversation was empty. You ever been there? Jesus didn't let that happen, because he knew this, that community was designed, go back, community was designed for a purpose. That community is designed for a purpose. And Jesus saw someone, that's the next slide, with a need, and he leaned into their life in that moment. Now, picking up the story, I'm going to repeat what Jesus said. Let's take a look at verse 3 again. He said this, Jesus asked the Pharisees and the experts in religious law, is it permitted in the law to heal people on the Sabbath day or not? Now, I love this because let me ask you a question. Were the Pharisees really expert at the law? See, it was a little muted there, right? Like, wait a second, that was not so clear. It's like, we think so. Yes. Pharisees, this was a leader of the Pharisees. He knew the law. This is a basic question. This is a simple question. But what's the question behind the question? Why did Jesus ask that question? Why did Jesus have to ask that question? It's because Jesus saw a man who most people wouldn't even go near. Jesus saw the one person at the dinner table that everyone else around that dinner table would have nothing to do with. And he didn't talk to the host. He didn't talk to any of the other religious leaders. Who did he focus on first? The man with the strongest need. Now, Terry, why are you bringing this up? If you haven't figured it out by now, today we're talking about how important it is to be a part of community. And I'm not just talking about one friend. I'm talking about a group of individuals that will pour into you and you pour into, that will lead you to a better life. And so a very simple question I would have for everybody in this room is, are you a part of community? Are you a part of a group? If you were to leave this big room, do you have a smaller group that you meet with on a consistent basis that you can say they pour into me and I pour into them? They pray for me and I pray for them. And the reason why that's important is this, is because we all need community. The Christian life was never meant to be lived alone. Jesus said that there's a purpose for community. But what I love about this is when you have a community, your community doesn't let you just get by. They ask the difficult questions. They get to the heart of the moment. And here's the great thing. If you're new to Christianity, you might say, well, Terry, then does everybody in this room have community? Like, is that a really, really well-known thing? I would say a small portion of this room would say that they're a part of a community. That's just the reality. And if you were to ask me, well, Terry, how is that so? If Jesus said this is so important, why aren't they a part of community? And I would say very simply, time, energy, focus, but here's one of the big ones. Who's going to be there? Do I like these people? Do we have anything in common? Am I going to connect with these people? Do they look like us? Do they act like us? Do they talk like us? I mean, we went one time, and I got to be honest with you, there were 4 other couples, and I see those 4 couples in the room. I won't look at them right now because, I don't want to be offensive. But those 4 couples are nowhere near the level of me, and so we left after that, and so we've never tried a group ever again. And here's what Jesus did. He went to this dinner, and you know what he modeled, and you know what he taught us? Is that Jesus Christ didn't expect community to be perfect. Could you imagine being in Jesus' group? You got a Pharisee, you got a group of Pharisees who are all out to kill him, and then you have a person who all they did was drag him to the dinner and he's near death and he's leaking on the floor. Try going into that house for community, right? I would walk out. I wouldn't want to be a part of it. But what Jesus was modeling for us is, hey, community's messy. It's messy. You're not going to have everybody that's going to be like you, act like you, talk like you. But it doesn't mean that community is not important. And community has a purpose because you never know what kind of purpose God could give you in that group. Because Jesus saw the potential for others, and he saw their potential to see others. In other words, Jesus saw someone and saw the ability of that person to be able to see others. And so in this group, Jesus stands there and says, is it lawful to heal this man or to heal anybody on the Sabbath? And watch what the Pharisees say. It's awkward at the table, right? Watch what happens in verse 4. When they refused to answer. It's a simple question. And the Pharisees stood there and said, they didn't want to answer. So you know what Jesus did? Jesus said, fine. You all want to sit there and skirt around what's really happening here. You want to sit there. I know you're trying to trap me. I know you're not here because you love this man with dropsy. And I know you certainly didn't invite me because you want to learn from me. This was all a setup. But I came anyway to show you the power of community. That when you step into someone else's life and you see a need, God might just have enough for you to be able to touch and change the course and direction of someone's life. And so I'm going to touch this man right here that you brought in as a prop, but God sees as a son of God. And so I'm going to touch this individual. This individual is going to be healed, and this individual is going to see others and make an impact in others' lives. Because that's how powerful community is. There's another moment in history, and just to sidestep this, I love this, because Jesus looks at the religious leaders and said, why don't you do something here? Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? You should know that answer. Of course it is. But you don't even know this, and you don't even care about this. Why don't you do something? Jesus did this one other time to the disciples. He was sitting there by the Sea of Galilee, and all of a sudden he had a bunch of people coming and listening to him. And then Peter and Philip are standing on the side, and all of a sudden they're watching the crowds come. And they were on crowd control duty, right? If you didn't know the disciples, it's like, Jesus is teaching, and we got to kind of watch everybody, make sure people are not killing Jesus and everything. So they're kind of watching. They're listening and they're watching. And so all of a sudden now hundreds come. And then when 1,000 people come, all of a sudden Peter looks at Philip and says, hey, we got a problem here because, it's getting close to mealtime and there's 1,000 people here and we don't have enough food. And then all of a sudden 1,000 turns into 2,000. 2,000 turns into 3,000. And then all of a sudden Peter says, he's in his long-winded pastoral speech again. He's got to end it. We got to do something. And then 3,000 turns into 6,000. Now, some of you who are biblical theologians, you're like, Terry, it said that he only fed 5,000 men. So then all of a sudden, 6,000 turns into 7,000, turns into 8,000. And now Peter is throwing his hands up in the air. It's like, hey, someone get the hook and get Jesus down. This is ridiculous. And then all of a sudden, Jesus decides he needs a little bit of a water break. So he turns around and he comes to get some water. Peter comes up to him and says, dude, what are you doing? That's not necessary. That's Terry's paraphrase version. And Jesus looks at him and is like, what do you mean? And he says, we got thousands of people here and there's no food for them to eat. This is a humanitarian crisis and you created it. And do you know what Jesus said to them? You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. Do you realize that I've brought all these people here and I see a need, and you just said you saw a need? Well, you give them something to eat. And the disciples looked and said, and what did Jesus do? By a simple power of God, he provided and he met the need. I think something amazing happens when we gather in groups. I think God can do incredible things when we gather in groups. And so in verse 5 and 6, we continue the story. He said, then after they refused to answer, he turned to them and said, which one of you doesn't work on the Sabbath? If your son or cow falls into a pit, don't you rush to get him out? Again, they could not answer. So if you're here today, and if you're wondering why, Terry, is it important to be a part of community and important to be a part of a group? Jesus Christ lived in community so that community could live in Jesus. Jesus lived in community so community could live in Jesus. Something powerful can happen when a group of believers gather together to pray. Do you know this, that if one single individual prays for a specific need, it's powerful, but it's not that powerful? Because do you know Scripture actually teaches us where two or more are gathered and two or more are united in prayer, that prayer has what? Power. It's as if God wanted us all to know that together we can do something pretty amazing. And so today, here's my simple question. Are you a part of community? This doesn't count. Do you have a group of other followers of Jesus that you connect with, that you make time for, that you lean in on, that you recognize a need, that you're not afraid of being imperfect, and that you're more than happy to be able to come and say, look, there are some things about my life that I don't know if we're going to agree on, but you know what? I know I need community, and I'm open to figuring it out. And if that's you, then community is important. Some of you in this room, you're like, Terry, I'm too busy. I got 4 kids. I got this, I got this, I got this, I got this, I got this. And I would tell you this. I told you at the beginning. Jesus made time for community. For the last several years, my wife and I, we've been a part of a group, because some of you are like, well, do you go to a group, Pastor Terry? Yes, I do. And by the way, when I lead a group, I'm the worst leader. I am. You don't want me leading your group, because pastors talk. And everybody just sits there, and when a question gets thrown out, everybody sits quiet because they all look at the pastor. So I don't like leading my group, but I'm a part of a group because I know how valuable that group is in my life. And you know what ends up happening is I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I don't have time, but I do it. And do you know what happens every time I leave group or they leave my house? Do you know what I say? Man, I know beforehand I was just really exhausted, but you know what? I'm so thankful for our group. And so today, if you're in this room and you are not a part of a group, I'm just going to challenge you. Up on the screen, you should see a QR code. We have groups on Sundays, but we have groups all throughout Myrtle Beach, all in different neighborhoods. And so if you want community, even if you can only go 2 times this fall, great. Do you know how many people say, well, Terry, I just don't have time. I probably only be able to come to 1. Great. That's how important it is. And so my prayer today is that you would follow the example of Jesus. That even if you think this is going to be a train wreck, I don't know if I'm going to connect with these people. I don't know. This person has 16 cats. I don't know if I can go. But that you say, you know what, though? I'm going to give it a chance. And for all of you who went one time to a group and it was a terrible experience and you never went back and you said, well, I tried. Did you try hard enough? Because I can tell you this. The Christian life was never meant to be lived alone. It was always meant to be lived in the context of a group. And the reason why is the following. Jesus modeled community so that everyone had an opportunity to be seen. Jesus didn't find time for community, and he made time for it. Jesus didn't expect community to be perfect, and Jesus lived in community so that community could live in Jesus. John Olerud didn't allow people making fun of him, didn't allow the fact that the New York Mets or the Marlins didn't really provide great accommodations for a group. He was willing to take a bucket, sit in a slimy shower, and he made time for it because he knew it matters. I pray that we all take a lesson from him today. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this message and for our time together today. God, you know my selfish prayer this morning. I pray that 3/4 of our church today at least would say yes to trying a group. I pray, God, we all are busy. We all have so much to do. But I pray that even if we could just go once, I pray that we'd take it. So today, may we see many in this church connected in community, following the example of Jesus. For we love you and we bless you. In your precious name we pray. Amen. May God bless you.